Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Gopi Janabalabha, Giribardhari, Gopi Janabalabha, Giribardhari, Yasoda Nandana, Brajajana Ranjana, Sodanandana, Brajajana Ranjana, Yasodanandana, Brajajana Ranjana, Yasodanandana, Brajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira, Manachari, Yamuna Tira, Manachari, Jai Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Prabhupada Shri Śrīmad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ki Samveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri, Shri Guru, and Shri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so we're on Canto 2, Chapter 9, Text 32, right? Yavanaham yatha bhavo Yavanaham yatha bhavo Yadrupa guna karmakaha Yadrupa guna karmakaha Tathaiva tattva vijnanam Tathaiva tattva vijnanam Astute mad anugrahat Astute mad anugrahat Yavanaham yatha bhavo Yadrupa guna karmakaha Tathaiva tattva vijnanam Astute mad anugrahat Yavanaham yatha bhavo Yadrupa guna karmakaha Tathaiva tattva vijnanam Astute mad anugrahat Yavanaham yatha bhavo Yadrupa guna karmakaha Tathaiva tattva vijnanam Astute mad anugrahat Yavanaham yatha bhavo Yadrupa guna karmakaha Tathaiva tattva vijnanam Astute mad anugrahat Yavan as I am in eternal form. Aham myself. Yatha as much as. Bhavaha transcendental existence. Yat those. Rupa various forms and colors. Guna qualities. Karmakaha activities. Tatha so and so. Eva, certainly. Tattva vijnanam, factual realization. Astu, let it be. Te, unto you. Mat, my. Anugrahat, by causeless mercy. So the translation reads, all of me, namely my actual eternal form and my transcendental existence, color, qualities, and activities, let all be awakened within you by factual realization out of my causeless mercy. So I'll say, and you please repeat, all of me, namely my actual eternal form and my transcendental existence, color, qualities, and activities, let all be awakened within you by factual realization out of my causeless mercy. So here is the purport. The secret of success in understanding the intricacies of knowledge of the absolute truth, the personality of God, is the causeless mercy of the Lord. Even in the material world, the father of many sons discloses the secret of his position to the pet sons. The father discloses the confidence unto the son whom he thinks worthy. An important man in the social order can be known by his mercy only. Similarly, one must be very dear to the Lord in order to know the Lord. The Lord is unlimited. No one can know him completely, but one's advancement in transcendental loving service to the Lord can make one eligible to know the Lord. Here, we can see that the Lord is sufficiently pleased with Brahmaji, and therefore he offers his causeless mercy to him, so that Brahmaji may have the factual realization of the Lord by his mercy only. In the Vedas, also, it is said that a person cannot know the absolute truth, personality of Godhead simply by dint of mundane education or intellectual gymnastics. One can know the supreme truth if one has unflinching faith in the bona fide spiritual master as well as the Lord. Such a faithful person, even though illiterate in the mundane sense, can know the Lord automatically by the mercy of the Lord. In Bhagavad Gita also it is said that the Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to everyone, and he keeps himself concealed from the faithless by his yogamaya potency. To the faithful, the Lord reveals himself in his form, qualities, and pastimes. The Lord is not formless, as wrongly conceived by the impersonalists, but his form is not like one that we have experienced. The Lord discloses his form even to the extent of measurement to his pure devotees. And that is the meaning of Yavan, as explained by Srila Jiva Goswami, the greatest scholar of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. The Lord discloses the transcendental nature of his existence. The mundane wranglers make mundane conceptions of the form of the Lord. It is said in the revealed scripture that the Lord has no mundane form. Therefore, persons with a poor fund of knowledge conclude that he must be formless. They cannot distinguish between the mundane form and the spiritual form. According to them, without a mundane form, one must be therefore formless. This conclusion is also mundane because formlessness is the opposite conception of form. Negation of the mundane conception does not establish a transcendental fact. In the Brahma Samhita, it is said that the Lord has a transcendental form, and that he can utilize any one of his senses for any purpose. For example, he can eat with his eyes, he can see with his leg. In the mundane conception of form, one cannot eat with one's eyes or see with his leg. That is a difference between the mundane body and the spiritual body of Satchit Ananda. The spiritual body is not formless. It is a different type of body, of which we cannot conceive with our present mundane senses. Formless, therefore, means devoid of mundane form, or possessing a spiritual body of which the non-devotee can have no conception by the speculative method. The Lord discloses to the devotee his unlimited varieties of transcendental bodies, all identical with one another with different kinds of bodily features. Some of the transcendental bodies of the Lord are blackish, some of them are whitish, some of them are reddish, and some are yellowish. Some of them are four-handed, some of them two-handed, some of them are like fish, some are like the lion. All these different transcendental bodies of the Lord, without any differential category, are disclosed to the devotee of the Lord by the mercy of the Lord, and thus the impersonalists' false arguments claiming the formlessness of the Supreme Truth do not appeal to the devotee of the Lord, even though such a devotee may not be very advanced in devotional service. The Lord has unlimited numbers of transcendental qualities, and one of them is his affection for his unalloyed devotee. In history of the mundane world, we can appreciate his transcendental qualities. The Lord incarnates himself for the protection of his devotees and for the annihilation of the faithless. His activities are in relationship with his devotees. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is full of such activities of the Lord in relationship with his devotees. And such non-devotees have no knowledge of such pastimes. The Lord lifted the Govardhan hill when he was only 7 years old and protected his pure devotee at Vrindavan from the wrath of Indra, who was over-flooding the place with rain. Now this lifting of Govardhan hill by a 7-year-old boy may be unbelievable for the faithless, but for the devotee it is absolutely believable. The devotee believes in the almighty potency of the Lord, while the faithless say that the Lord is almighty but do not believe it. Such men with poor fund of knowledge do not know that the Lord is eternally, that the Lord is the Lord eternally, and that one cannot become the Lord by meditation for millions and billions of years or by mental speculation for billions of years. Impersonalist interpretations of the mundane wranglers is completely refuted in this verse because it is clearly stated here that the Supreme Lord has everything that a person has. All these descriptions of the transcendental nature of the personality of Godhead are factual realizations by the devotee of the Lord. And by causeless mercy of the Lord, they are revealed to his pure devotee and to no one else. Yavanaham yatha bhavo yad rupa guna karmakaha tataiva tattva vijnanam astute mad anugrahat. All of me, namely my actual eternal form and my transcendental existence, color, qualities, and activities, let all be awakened within you by factual realization out of my causeless mercy. So, one cannot know the Supreme Lord without the mercy of the Lord. And depending on one's depth of devotion to the Lord is to what extent one might know actually what the Supreme is like. And one of the things I realized even in earlier life, you know, in my youth, was that lots of people talk about God, but there's precious little information about God. I think if you gave most people 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and asked them to fill it up with a description of God, most would struggle to fill one sheet of paper up, you know, because why? There's not a lot of detailed information. In fact, as Prabhupada kind of harps on in this particular purport, the idea that most people have is that God is formless. And if God is formless, well, you know, now makes it easy, right? Then nothing to talk about, right? He doesn't have a form, then there must be nothing to talk about. So you can't draw a picture. You can't describe anything. If he doesn't have a form, how does he perform activities? Well, most religionists believe that he does somehow perform activities. He must somehow. But if he doesn't have a form, how exactly does he do that? Well, I guess through some magical intervention or something like that. That's how he does things, even though he doesn't have any form. And this is a problem. It is true, as Prabhupada said in the beginning of the purport, that no one can understand God completely. But one can certainly know a lot more about God than most people do, you know, and that's the duty of the devotees. You know, we can explain more about God than most people have ever thought about. And of course, unfortunately, the world is full of all kinds of blocking dogmas of various types. And these dogmas obfuscate the nature of God. And the most fundamental, or the most blocking of all these, is this impersonal concept. We do not reject the idea that God is everywhere. Far from it. However, that's not a very important feature of the Lord, and therefore the Brahman, or the universal aspect of God, these two are not of any particular interest or focus for the devotees, although they might be the total focus of other religious people, and those who may just be philosophical but not necessarily religious. So in Bhagavad Gita, there's a verse that I always turn to, which is a very nice verse for describing how there is a echelon or a hierarchy of recognizing the Supreme Lord. There is, of course, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam Yatantascha Dridha Vrataha Namasyantas Tamam Bhaktya Nityayukta Upasate. This is 9.14, which says this is what devotees do. They're always chanting my glories and endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. But the next verse describes others. Jnana yagyena chapyanye yajanto mam upasate ekatvena pratakvena bahuda Ishvatamukam. Others who engage in sacrifice by cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as one, the one without a second, two, as diverse and many, and three, in the universal form. So the Sanskrit of these is the Ekatvena, the Prithakvena Bahuda, and the Ishvatamukam. So the Ekatvena is the one without a second, which is this impersonal or Brahman conception of God. The Prithakvena Bahuda are demigod worshippers who worship various aspects of the Lord's management team. And they worship them instead of worshiping the Supreme Lord. And finally, we have the universal form, Ishvatamukam. Some people worship the universal form. And this form, the universal form, the Ishvatamukam, is becoming surprisingly popular in our world in more recent times. And how is it different from the Brahman realization? Essentially, they're very close. But the Brahman realization acknowledges something beyond the universe, which the universal form doesn't. As far as the universal form goes, one just thinks of God as the universe is God, end of story. And this is more commonly known in everyday language as pantheism. So, this chapter, chapter 9, we just finished the section from verses 19 through 30, and that was where the Supreme Lord is speaking to Brahma, and he is pleased with Brahma, and Brahma asks questions. In particular, Brahma asked 4 questions, and these are going to be answered because tomorrow's verse will be the very first of the Chatur Sloki, which are 4 nutshell verses of the entire Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam has 18,000 verses, but you can read these next 4 and you've got the gist of all the other 18,000. Well, maybe not exactly, unless you're very realized. So these 4 next verses, 33, 34, 35, 36, these are the nutshell or the gist or the crux or the core of the philosophy of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Or we could say they're the bija, the seed of the entire Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. But what are the 4 questions that Brahma asks? The first one is what's being talked about right now. And this is what the Lord is starting to wind up or wind into, is this idea that Brahma has asked, how do you, who have a transcendental form, actually appear in this material world with various forms, although you are not mundane? How does that work? You know, so this is a very good question. And this question has puzzled our world philosophers for millennia, particularly our modern philosophers. They don't know how to deal with this question at all. How can the Lord, who must be transcendental, how can he appear in the mundane world and have various forms? And Prabhupada kind of sort of gave a quick overview, you know, the other day. Our Hansarupa was reading in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where we were discussing Vilas and Prakas forms. So the Supreme Lord sometimes expands himself in identical forms, or nearly identical forms, as he did in the rasa dance. there a picture of it here? No, I guess was here at one point, but not anymore. In the rasa dance, the Supreme Lord danced with each of the gopis. And each gopi thought that he was dancing with her alone, but actually he was dancing with each and every gopi. And those are called prakas expansions, when they're all identical for the most part. Vilas expansions are expansions that are visually dissimilar, and there may even be a different mood, as in Ramachandra. Ramachandra, we've been talking about since we just had Ram Navami. His complexion is greenish, and Krishna's is bluish black. So, different color. Krishna comes in colors, as we see here. The purport hinted at a white color. Where does Krishna come in a white color? In Satya Yuga. He comes with dreadlocks and as a brahmachari with 4 arms carrying a water pot. And he teaches the meditational process, the yoga meditational process. In Satya Yuga, that's a white form. Then in Treta Yuga, he comes in a reddish form with a belt and 3 Brahman threads, and he performs various kinds of yagyas, and he is reddish in that form. Of course, in Dwapara Yuga, we all know he comes in the blackish form as Krishna himself, Swayam Rup. So when Krishna comes himself in his own form, that is called Swayam Rup. He comes as his own expansion, or his own self, and that form has, or is considered to have, all the forms within it. So that is the blackish form. And then, of course, in our Yuga, in Kali Yuga, he comes in a yellowish or pita, and this is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Lord Chaitanya comes in a yellowish or golden complexion. So the Supreme Lord has all these forms. And beyond that, he has various Vishnu forms, which are mostly 4-armed. He has the Sadbhuja form, which is 6-armed. And he has some other forms that are 8-armed. And he has some with unlimited arms, as Nrsingadev's, when he was attacking the soldiers of Hiranyakashipu, he had unlimited arms. And he has forms that don't resemble human, like his Matsya incarnation, his Kurma incarnation of a tortoise, the boar incarnation, and of course the half-man, half-lion incarnation of Nrsingadev. So all these are also forms. These are not fanciful forms, they're not mythological forms, they're not mental creations of some artist or some poet or of some literary writer. These are genuine forms of the Lord. And these genuine forms are spoken about, written about in the Vedic literatures. Each one is not just a name or a slot in some, grid. Each one has pastimes, qualities, and these forms perform different functions. Some of these forms are ones that perform pastimes, and others perform some maintenance task in and for the behalf of the universe. So many forms do that. Now, how would someone know about these forms unless one learned about them from some source? So the Vedic literature described these forms, and the Vedic literature described them in detail, what the purpose was, what the shape was, why the particular form was taken, what the mission or the accomplishments were, and of course, in many cases, these forms that are more rasic, ones that have various kinds of pastimes, we actually hear about the pastimes. And therefore, we understand all these various different kinds of pastimes. But in our modern age, it's like a big suitcase full of all these different possible views of the Supreme that most people never open. Instead, what do we have in our modern world? We have this kind of either philosophical understanding of God as a pantheistic notion, or we have the Brahman, and of course there's those who believe there is no God, that God is a fiction completely. So this is what we have. Impersonalism is a serious block to understanding God for many reasons. One of them is that if you believe the Lord has no form, then at the same time, it's hard to imagine that something that has no form would give you any duties to perform. What duties can you perform for something that has no form? You can't perform any duties. And it's also similar in notion, and many philosophers do arrive at this, that if God has no form, why does he restrict anything? Why restrict something? If you don't have form yourself, why are you giving form in the world of things you should avoid and things you should rather do? Of course, most religions do accept some restrictions, although those restrictions start to quiver and collapse easily when you put forward a God that has no form. So God is making laws and rules and restrictions when he himself has no form. Shankaracharya, somewhere, some accounts say around the 7th century, some say the 8th, somewhere around that period of time, he, as Lord Shiva, advented himself. He is an incarnation of Lord Shiva. He didn't live very long in this planet, but he accomplished a lot while he was here. And he spread this notion, which is a false doctrine, although he himself was empowered by the Supreme to bring this false doctrine. And the false doctrine is that the Supreme Lord has no form. And in his brief time in this world, he established 4 major mats, one in the north, one in the south, one in the east, and one in the west, and preached this doctrine, and it became the official doctrine of India, supplanting the Buddhism that preceded it. So originally there was the Vedic knowledge. Then the Vedic knowledge degraded into basically a kind of karma mimamsa, which was actually also involved in animal slaughter. Then Buddha came to stop the animal slaughter. Then after Buddha became the prominent religion or spiritual path in India, along 7th, 8th century, Shankaracharya switched this Buddhism to the impersonal or Brahman understanding. And this became the prevalent view. And Buddhism remained, but it remained outside of India. So Shankaracharya did not exceed the limits of the boundaries of India, so that's why Buddhism remained in China and the other places in the subcontinent there. So what about the other religions in the world? We have what are called the Abrahamic religions, which includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in that order as they were manifest in our world. First is Judaism, and then there is Christianity, starting at roughly 0 AD. And then we have the religion of Islam, which is also somewhere in the 7th, 8th, 9th century, somewhere like that. These religions are also mostly, at least nowadays, impersonalistic. How does this happen? So we were talking about this a few days ago, that does the Bible really support the idea that God has no form? And the answer is not really. In Om Shalom, which is a book that was written by Satyaraj, he's talking with one rabbi whose name is Rabbi Shimel. And he describes that in the Old Testament there are lots of references to the finger of God, the hand of God, the voice of God, that Moses saw the back of God, you know. So these are certainly references to a form. So if the Supreme is described, and of course in Genesis we have that man is made in the image of God. So here we have direct and clear references in the Bible to the fact that the Supreme indeed does have a form. So how did this get lost, or what actually occurred? And I'm sure that this impersonalistic philosophy from India, as Prabhupada once called it, the evil fruit of Indian philosophy, drifted across borders and influenced the thinking. Now, the person that I usually point the finger at is Moses Maimonides, who lived, I think, 1135 to 1204, somewhere around that range of time. So he was born in Spain, but he lived mostly in Egypt and preached there. And he influenced both Judaism and eventually Islam. And he taught that where the Bible talks about the Lord having a form, it is all allegorical. It cannot be that he really has a form. What was his reasoning for this? And his reasoning was that how can God be one and be in two places, like heaven and earth? How can God be one and not be everything then? Not exactly really strong reasoning. Of course, he had no access to Chaitanya's Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, that the Supreme Lord can be an individual and at the same time everywhere at once. Yasya prabha prabhavato jagadanda koti. So in Brahma Samhita we find that this Brahman, which is the effulgence of the Supreme Lord, is the source of the material universe. So both this Brahman feature and also the pantheistic feature of the universe, both of these actually emanate from the Supreme Lord. Both of these different things expand, as we're hearing a hint of here in these verses here in the 9th chapter of 2nd canto. So the Supreme, he expands as the Brahmajyoti, which is the white light, the famous white light, which is non-differentiated and is eternally the same, has no qualities other than whiteness and eternality and a unlimited expansiveness. Those are the qualities it has. It's not changing into something else, but it does, in the material world, morph into the pantheistic expansion as the various millions of planets and universes that we inhabit. So the pantheists, they worship this aspect, whereas the impersonalists worship the Brahman aspect, the white light itself, which closely related but not exactly the same thing. So the individuals who worship the Brahman, they wish to merge into the Brahman. And that can be done, but it is not recommended, and it is not actually the highest place, because one cannot stay there. One must come out of the Brahman. You know, the Brahman is not a permanent location. So at some point, because we are sensate, we have senses, because we have consciousness, we cannot remain merged and unindividualized for any length of time. We get bored with it because we are used to activities and relationships, and we cannot remain in a depersonalized situation for any length of time. We must come out of it. And this is also described in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Yene ravandaksha vimuktamanina swayashtabhavadavishuddha buddhaya. So they may imagine that they are very advanced because they've merged with the Brahman, but avishuddha buddhaya, their intelligence is not fully purified. And one must fall. Patanti nadrita yusmad angriya, that they must fall down from that position. And they do. Well, what does Krishna say? Do the Vedas really support this Brahman as being the source of everything? No. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna clearly says that Brahmano hi pratishtaham, that I am the source of Brahman, not that Brahman's the source of him. It's very clear. And as Prabhupada, you know, Prabhupada doesn't quote any of these verses, but there are about 20 verses in this purport that I could see Prabhupada was relating to. You know, he was discussing these ideas, but he didn't actually quote the verse. You know, he just related what the verse actually says. You know, and Brahma Samhita, we hear all this detailed explanation. You know. Alola, Chandra, Kala, Lasad, you know, Vanamalya, Vamshi. So there is that one verse. Over here we have Chintamani, Prakara, Sadmasu, Kalpa Vriksha. And, you know, we have all these verses. And as Prabhupada mentioned, you know, Advaita, Machuta, Manadir, Ananta Rupam, you know, that he is original and Vedeshu Durlabha Madurla Mamatma Bhaktao, that one cannot know him by scholarship of the Vedas. One can only know him when he reveals himself. Then one can know him. Otherwise, one remains in these lower categories as either a demigod worship, you know, Pritak Vena Bahuda, or Ekat Vena, a monist, or Ishvatamukam, a kind of deist, which means that a person believes in God, but God can't be connected with. He is just an intelligence and an energy that pervades the universe, and that's as far as it goes. Of course, that idea really goes back to another modern philosopher named Baruch Spinoza, who was kind of the one who made that very prominent. So deism had a heyday at one time in the intellectual world. Now it's faded out. But something like it is coming back to some extent. But these are forms or relationships of God that are incomplete. Whereas in Vaishnava literatures, in Bhagavad Gita and in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, we learn, and Brahma will learn, about these various forms of God. So I'm going to stop there. There's a whole bunch more I wanted to say, but this is one of those verses that really pushes all my buttons. So I had too much to say. But any questions, comments? Yeah.
In terms of avatars, usually we understand Kalki in the normal universes that Lord Chaitanya doesn't. The Kalki is the Yuga Kali.
Yeah.
But
He only comes one time in a day of Brahma as Chaitanya.
So, but doesn't usually the Yuga avatar bring the Yuga Dharma?
Yes.
What's Kalki bringing?
Well, Kalki's not the Yuga Dharma.
Oh, he's not the Yuga avatar.
He's not a Yuga avatar. He's a, I think, Manvantara avatar or something like that.
So in the normal universe, when Lord Chaitanya doesn't come, who's usually the Yuga?
Usually, from what I understand, there are various four-arm forms that come. And they also bring some kind of dharma, but exactly what the nature of that dharma, I'm not sure. It might be the same basic thing of hearing and chanting, but it's not Lord Chaitanya. It's a four-armed Vishnu form that brings that. Because generally speaking, most of the avatars are four-arm forms. The one in Satyuga is four-armed, and I think also in Treta-Yuga is four-armed, the red, the Rakta one. And Krishna, of course, is another exception because he only comes also once in a day of Brahman. In the 28th millennium of the 7th Manvantar, each cycle of Brahma's day. There's only one time in thousands of yuga cycles does Krishna come. And similarly, Lord Chaitanya comes in the following Kali Yuga, right after the Dwapara Yuga that Krishna comes in. So they're related.
So only then Lord Chaitanya comes as the Yuga avatar for Kali.
Yes, Lord Chaitanya comes as the Yuga avatar. There are 5 kinds of avatars, or 6 kinds of avatars. There's, Purusha avatars. There are only 3 of them. There's Guna avatars. There's only 3 of them. And there's Leela avatars, and there are unlimited of them. They are ones who have various Leelas. There are Manvantara avatars. So in each Manvantara, there are special incarnations that come, and they are somehow connected to the Manvantara. So they come in various Manvantaras. Then there are Yuga avatars, as we just talked about, ones that come to bring the Yuga Dharma. There's 4 of those, one for each Yuga in a cycle. And then there is what we call Shaktavesha Avatars, which are avatars that usually are not Vishnu Tattva. They're not the supreme. They're rather empowered incarnations, like Vyasadeva, like Prithu, like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Prabhupada. So these are ones who are empowered to do some special work in the material world. And they are called Shaktavesha avatars. So these are the different classifications. Now, these classifications are not mutually exclusive. There can be avatars who actually fit 2 or more categories. But the Purusha avatars are, Karnadakshay Vishnu, Kshirodakshay Vishnu, and Garbhodakshay Vishnu. There's three of those. The guna avatars are, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And Brahma is not actually Vishnu Tattva, as we're learning. He's a living entity just like you and I, but he's specially empowered, so he could be also considered a Shaktavesha Avatar. So he's kind of straddling the categories there. And then you have Shiva, who's in a complete class by himself as a Shiva Tattva, where he's not exactly a living entity like you and me, but he's also not fully the Supreme Lord like the Supreme. So there are all these different kinds of avatars. And when you stop to think about it, talking about God is the most complex subject in the universe, because actually everything comes from him. How can it not be? Everything else is just a subset of him in some way or another. But generally, people are just interested in the subsets and not interested in talking about the Supreme himself.
And I was wondering also what's like the difference between Vibhuti and Shaktavesha. Is it that a Shaktavesha is like directly empowered by God for a particular purpose?
Yeah, what was the other one?
Vibhuti, like someone who has a...
Well, I think those are not mutually exclusive terms. I think those are just different descriptions, of, in some cases, the same thing, that usually those living entities who have become very pure and therefore are now able to work directly on behalf of the Supreme, they are considered Shaktavesha Avatars, and they can act sometimes even more powerfully than the Supreme Lord does, because the Supreme Lord likes to work through his devotees. But technically they're not Vishnu Tattva. Rupa Goswami explains that there are 64 qualities for the Supreme. And only Krishna has all 64. All the other Vishnu Tattvas only have 60 of the 64 qualities. And the demigods and Shaktavesha avatars can have 50 of the 60, so 64. So these are, various qualifications or qualities that distinguish what we mean by a Vishnu Tattva from a Shakti Tattva, or from, for instance, a Jiva Tattva, an empowered Jiva Tattva, Shaktavesha Avatar. But when you really get into all these different categories, Ekat, what is it? There's Tad Ekatma Rupa and Prakash Vilas, and a whole lot more of them. And I think in some ways these are descriptive, and again, they're not all mutually exclusive categories, that if one is solidly in one category, that avatar can't also be in a different category. Any other questions or comments? Jayo, so thank you. You made it through another one of my lectures. Somehow or another, you're still alive. Thank you for your kind attention. All glories to Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. All glories to Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Hare Krishna.